September 19th, 1944, 0730 hours, Bézange-la-Petite, Lorraine, France. The morning fog hung thick across the French countryside as Panther tank commander Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann peered through his cupola into the grey void that swallowed everything beyond 30 metres. His hands trembled slightly, not from the September chill, but from what he had just witnessed through the mist. Through a brief break in the fog, Hoffmann had glimpsed something that violated everything he understood about armoured warfare. An American tank destroyer, if that's what it was, had materialised from nowhere, fired twice, and vanished before his gunner could even traverse the turret halfway toward it. The burning hulk of another Panther, 50 metres to their left, testified that this was no hallucination. 42 Panthers of the 113th Panzer Brigade had rolled into the attack that morning, supremely confident in their mechanical superiority. The Panther, with its 75mm high-velocity gun and sloped armour that could deflect most Allied shells, represented the pinnacle of German engineering. These men had been told repeatedly that American armour was inferior, hastily built, mechanically unreliable, manned by inexperienced crews who relied on numerical superiority rather than tactical skill. What they encountered in the fog-shrouded fields around Arracourt would shatter every assumption about armoured combat they had carried from the Eastern Front. The M18 Hellcat, a name they would learn only after capture or survival, was about to demonstrate that the Americans had reimagined tank warfare itself, trading armour for a speed that rendered traditional tank tactics obsolete. The development of the M18 Hellcat began not in response to German armour, but from a uniquely American military philosophy that emerged in December 1941. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce, commanding the newly formed Tank Destroyer Center at Fort Meade, Maryland, had studied the German blitzkrieg with the eye of an engineer rather than a traditionalist. His conclusion was revolutionary. Rather than meeting tanks with tanks in heavyweight slugging matches, why not create a vehicle that could strike and vanish before the enemy could respond? Bruce's vision called for a vehicle that prioritized three characteristics in order: speed, firepower, and crew efficiency. Armour protection, the holy grail of German tank design, ranked a distant fourth. This philosophy would have been considered madness in the Wehrmacht, where the progression from Panzer III to Panther to Tiger represented an inexorable march toward thicker armour and bigger guns. The Ordnance Department issued a requirement for a fast tank destroyer using torsion bar suspension, a Wright Continental R975 engine, and initially a 37mm gun. The design evolved rapidly through various prototypes with different armaments until the T-7076mm gun motor carriage emerged, which would become the M18. By July 1943, when the first production M18s rolled off the assembly line at Buick's Flint, Michigan plant, a vehicle had been created that would challenge the fundamental assumptions of armoured warfare. Powered by a 9-cylinder, 350 to 400 horsepower Wright R975 radial aircraft engine, the same power plant used in the M4 Sherman, but in a chassis that weighed about 20 tons instead of 33, the M18 could achieve speeds that seemed impossible for a tracked vehicle. The Hellcat was capable of travelling at 55 miles per hour, 89 kilometers per hour, with some sources indicating the vehicle could reach 60 miles per hour in ideal conditions. This wasn't just marginally faster than German armour, it was in an entirely different category. The Panther's maximum speed of 46 kilometers per hour, 29 miles per hour, on roads seemed respectable until compared to the M18's ability to maintain 40 miles per hour across rough terrain. The roots of German armoured dominance lay in the combined arms tactics perfected during the Polish and French campaigns. Panzer divisions operated as integrated units, tanks, mechanized infantry, artillery, and engineers working in concert. The tanks themselves were the armoured fist, designed to break through enemy lines and create havoc in rear areas. Speed mattered, but survivability mattered more. German tank development reflected this philosophy. Each iteration grew heavier, more heavily armoured, more powerfully armed. The Panther, introduced in 1943, weighed 45 tons and mounted armour up to 100 millimetres thick on its turret front. The Tiger II, entering service in 1944, pushed these figures to 70 tons and 180 millimetres respectively. The American tank destroyer doctrine, formalised in Field Manual 18-5 and refined through 1943, represented a complete rejection of this approach. Tank destroyers were to be held in reserve, responding rapidly to enemy armour concentrations. Instead of duelling at range, they would use superior mobility to achieve flanking positions, destroy enemy armour from the sides and rear, then redeploy before counterattack. The M18 originated in Harley Earl's design studio, part of the Buick motor division of General Motors. Earl, famous for automotive design, brought a different perspective to military vehicle development. The result was a vehicle that looked and performed more like a race car with a cannon than a traditional tank. The M18's combat debut came in Italy, where 5 T-70 models were sent to the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion at the Anzio beachhead in spring 1944. The Italian campaign, with its mountainous terrain and narrow roads, hardly seemed ideal for a vehicle designed for high-speed manoeuvre. Yet even here, the M18's capabilities stunned German defenders. The early engagements remained localized, their lessons not disseminated through the Wehrmacht. The German army in France, preparing for the invasion they knew was coming, remained focused on the threat posed by massed Sherman tanks and tank destroyers like the M10, which, while more mobile than German tanks, still operated within conventional parameters. By September 1944, when the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion with its M18 Hellcats joined the US 4th Armoured Division near Arracourt, the German army in Lorraine was operating under a fatal misunderstanding. The 113th Panzer Brigade was formed on September 4, 1944, and by the time it was sent to Saarburg on September 16th, it had 42 Panther tanks. Many crew members were veterans of the Eastern Front, where they had faced T-34s and KV-1s in brutal engagements where armour and firepower determined survival. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had originally been trained on the M3 gun motor carriage. Despite requiring several improvements during testing, the 704th had a superlative testing record and was later issued production Hellcats. The unit had spent months perfecting techniques that would maximize the Hellcat's speed advantage. On the morning of September 19th, as the 113th Panzer Brigade advanced through thick fog toward Arracourt, they expected to brush aside the American screening forces and strike deep into the rear areas of the 4th Armoured Division. German intelligence had identified Sherman tanks in the area, but no significant anti-tank defences. At 07:15, as German Panthers crept forward through the fog at 5 miles per hour, straining to see through the mist, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon of 4 M18 Hellcats from Company C, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, was positioned near Réchicourt-le-Petit. The M18S had been in position since before dawn, engines idling quietly, crews scanning their assigned sectors. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper led an M18 platoon of Company C to Réchicourt-le-Petit on the way to Moncourt. He saw a German tank gun muzzle appearing out of the fog 30 feet away and deployed his platoon. The first indication the Germans had of the M18's presence came when an American tank destroyer roared to life and accelerated from a complete stop to 30 miles per hour in seconds. Acceleration that would have taken a Panther nearly 30 seconds to achieve. The M18 burst from its concealed position, raced to a flanking position, and fired rounds into the side of the nearest Panther before the German turret had traversed even halfway toward the threat. In a 5-minute period, 5 German tanks of the 113th Panzer Brigade were knocked out for the loss of 1 M18. The engagement demonstrated systematic destruction by an enemy that refused to fight according to the rules the Germans understood. The disparities between the Panther and M18 created a fundamental mismatch in combat capabilities. The Panther's turret, weighing nearly 7 tons with its thick armour and long 75mm gun, required 60 seconds to complete a full rotation using its hydraulic traverse system. Under combat conditions, with the engine at low RPM to minimise detection, traverse speeds dropped even further. The M18's turret, by contrast, weighed just over 2 tons. The speed of the turret traverse was far faster when compared to the M10, which had a manually rotated turret. An M18 crew could track and engage targets in any direction within seconds, while Panther crews were still struggling to locate the threat. Early feedback from crews indicated that the M18 could go hundreds of miles under trying conditions without requiring major repairs to either the armaments or the engine. Crews reported only having to perform minimal maintenance on the vehicle's moving parts. The Panther, despite its fearsome reputation, suffered from chronic mechanical problems. Final drive failures were endemic. The unit was designed for a 35-ton vehicle, but installed in the 45-ton Panther. During the September 19th engagement, several Panthers were abandoned due to mechanical failure during attempted pursuit of the M18S. As the morning fog began to lift around 900, the full sophistication of American tank destroyer tactics became apparent. The M18S operated not as individual vehicles, but as a coordinated team, using radio communication to vector each other onto targets and warn of threats. Under the direction of Captain Tom Evans, the lead platoon of Company C served as an attractive target for the German tanks, which failed to notice the other 2 platoons of Hellcats advancing on their flanks. This was tank destroyer doctrine in perfect execution, one element fixing enemy attention while others manoeuvred for killing shots. The coordination extended beyond individual platoons. CCA's dispositions around Arracourt consisted of a thinly held salient, using an extended outpost line of armoured infantry and engineers, supported by tanks, tank destroyers, and artillery. The M18S were the mobile striking force operating within a sophisticated combined arms system. By noon on September 19th, the 113th Panzer Brigade's attack had stalled. The platoon continued to fire and destroyed 10 more German tanks while losing another 2 M18. One of the platoon's M18s, commanded by Sergeant Henry R. Hartmann, knocked out 6 of the German tanks, most of which were Panthers. The mathematics were incomprehensible to German commanders. Panthers, costing 117,100 Reichsmarks each and requiring 2,000 man-hours to build, were being destroyed by vehicles that cost $57,500 and could be assembled in a fraction of the time. Poor tactical deployment of the German tanks soon exposed their weaker side armour to Shermans, which flanked and knocked out 11 Panzers using the fog as cover. The Germans, lacking adequate reconnaissance, had advanced blindly into a kill zone. The M18's speed advantage wasn't just about the engine. Every aspect of the vehicle had been optimized for rapid movement and quick reaction. The M18's design incorporated several innovative labour-saving maintenance features, with the engine mounted on steel rollers that allowed maintenance crews to disconnect it easily from the transmission, roll it out onto the lowered engine rear cover, service it, and reconnect it. A trained crew could replace an entire engine in less than 2 hours, a job that required a full day on a Panther. Buick engineers used a torsion bar suspension that provided a steady ride. German tanks still used leaf spring or interleaved road wheel systems that limited high-speed travel over rough terrain. An M18 could maintain 40 miles per hour across broken ground that would force a Panther to slow to 10 miles per hour or risk throwing a track. The automatic transmission represented another advantage. The M18 used the innovative Torquematic automatic transmission, derived from Buick's civilian designs, allowing drivers to concentrate on manoeuvring while the transmission handled gear changes. Panther drivers wrestled with manual gearboxes requiring double clutching and precise timing. The American superiority in radio communication proved decisive. Every M18 carried an SCR 508 FM radio set, providing reliable voice communication between vehicles and with supporting units. German tanks typically had one radio per platoon, with other vehicles relying on signal flags or pre-arranged maneuvers. This communication gap multiplied the M18's speed advantage. American tank destroyer crews could coordinate complex maneuvers in real time, calling out targets, warning of threats, and adjusting tactics instantly. German crews operated in relative isolation, each tank commander making decisions based only on what he could see through his vision blocks. By September 20th, as the 111th Panzer Brigade joined the battle, German tank crews were experiencing something unprecedented: fear of an enemy they couldn't effectively fight. The psychological impact went beyond the immediate tactical situation. These were men who had faced T-34s in Ukraine, who had survived the crushing battles of Kursk, who had learned that German tactical skill and technical superiority could overcome numerical disadvantages. The Panther had been their vindication, a tank that could destroy any Allied vehicle while remaining immune to return fire. Now that certainty was shattered. The speed difference created tactical situations that German training had never addressed. Panthers, designed as offensive weapons to dominate the battlefield, found themselves desperately trying to defend against an enemy that refused to stand and fight. Hellcat crews learned that a well-placed shot between the mantelet and the glacis plate of a Panther would cause the shell to ricochet into the driving compartment, killing the crew or disabling the tank. This required extreme close range and precise shooting, tactics that would have been suicidal against an enemy that could respond quickly. But the Panthers couldn't respond quickly enough. Their ponderous turret traverse, slow acceleration, and limited visibility made them vulnerable to an enemy that turned every strength into weakness. The Germans attempted various adaptations. Some units began operating Panthers in pairs, back-to-back, attempting to cover all angles. But this required stationary positioning, surrendering all initiative to the Americans. It also assumed reliable communication between vehicles, which most German tanks lacked. Behind the tactical revolution lay an industrial reality that German officers were only beginning to grasp. The M18 wasn't just faster than German tanks, it was easier to produce, maintain, and replace. Production began in July 1943, and 2,507 units were built by October 1944. Production peaked in January 1944 at 250 M18s per month. Each vehicle required approximately 500 man-hours to complete, compared to the 2,000 man-hours needed for a Panther. German tank production grew increasingly complex as the war progressed. The Panther required specialized tools, skilled workers, and rare materials. Its Maybach engine was hand-assembled by craftsmen. Each vehicle was essentially hand-built, limiting production even when resources were available. American factories could replace every M18 lost at Arracourt in less than 2 days of production. German Panther production, at its absolute peak, managed 380 vehicles per month across all factories, but this included all fronts, training vehicles, and replacements. The loss of 39 Panthers at Arracourt represented over a week's total production. As the Battle of Arracourt continued through late September, American crews refined their tactics based on combat experience. M18s began operating in coordinated groups, using their speed to overwhelm German defences from multiple directions simultaneously. The morning of September 22nd saw new tactics employed. M18s sprinted across open ground at maximum speed toward German positions near Coincourt. The Panthers, caught completely off guard by the speed of approach, managed only a few wild shots before the M18s were among them. The psychological effect on German crews was devastating. They knew the Americans were coming. They could hear the engines from a kilometre away. But knowing and responding were different things. The M18s covered the distance in less than a minute, moving too fast for German gunners to track effectively. As the battle continued, Another M18 advantage emerged: mechanical reliability under combat conditions. Crews reported that their vehicles could go hundreds of miles under trying conditions without requiring major repairs. The Panther was a maintenance nightmare. By September 22nd, the 113th Panzer Brigade reported that of their original Panthers, many losses were due to mechanical failure rather than enemy action. Final drives failed under the stress of rapid manoeuvring. Transmissions overheated from drivers trying to accelerate quickly to respond to M18 attacks. The M18, built with American automotive mass production techniques and reliability standards, simply kept running. The air-cooled right engine, while loud, was nearly indestructible. The automatic transmission required minimal maintenance. The torsion bar suspension had few parts to fail. On September 24th, Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, coordinated a combined attack with the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Sherman tanks would advance slowly, drawing German attention and fire, while M18 used their speed to infiltrate through wooded areas and dead ground. The tactic worked brilliantly. As Panthers engaged the Shermans at long range, confident in their superior guns and armour, M18s burst from concealment at multiple points. The German tanks, caught in a crossfire, couldn't respond effectively to threats from multiple directions. By September 25th, senior German commanders were beginning to understand the nature of the threat they faced. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, issued new tactical instructions, essentially admitting defeat. Enemy tank destroyers of exceptional speed operating in this sector: do not pursue, do not engage in mobile battle. These instructions reduced the Panther, designed as a mobile, offensive weapon, to a static pillbox. They surrendered all initiative to the Americans and acknowledged that German armour could no longer dominate the battlefield through superior tactics and technology. By the time the Battle of Arracourt ended, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had knocked out 39 German tanks, for the loss of 4 M18s destroyed and 3 more damaged. This remarkable kill ratio vindicated the American tank destroyer doctrine in the most dramatic fashion possible. The battle demonstrated that the entire German conception of tank warfare, based on armour, firepower, and deliberate tactical movement, could be negated by sufficient speed and tactical flexibility. The M18 had proven that a vehicle with armour barely sufficient to stop small arms fire could dominate heavily armoured opponents through superior mobility. The ultimate test of the M18's revolutionary impact came in December 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. German forces, launching their last major offensive in the West, initially achieved surprise and breakthrough. But as M18-equipped tank destroyer battalions rushed to critical points, their speed again proved decisive. Team de Sobry, a battalion-sized tank infantry task force of the 10th Armoured Division, was assigned to defend Neuville. With just 4 M18 tank destroyers of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion to assist, they attacked units of the 2nd Panzer Division. Team de Sobry's high-speed highway journey to reach the blocking position is one of the few documented cases where the top speed of the M18 Hellcat was actually used to get ahead of an enemy force. The high-speed deployment of M18s to blocking positions ahead of German spearheads repeatedly disrupted German timetables. Panthers and Tigers found themselves engaged by M18s that had raced ahead to favourable positions, using their speed to concentrate at critical points faster than German commanders could adjust their plans. The final statistics from the European theatre told a sobering story for German armour advocates. The M18 had a higher kill-to-loss ratio than any other tank or tank destroyer fielded by US forces in World War II. Kills claimed were 526 in total, 498 in Europe, 17 in Italy, and 11 in the Pacific. The kills-to-losses ratio for Europe was 2.3 to 1, and the overall kill-to-loss ratio was 2.4 to 1. These numbers became even more impressive when considering that M18s were not primarily used for tank fighting, but were committed more often to improvised roles, usually direct fire support for infantry. Even when employed outside their intended role, M18s maintained exceptional effectiveness. The fundamental difference between German and American armoured vehicle design philosophy was starkly illustrated in the contrast between the Panther and the M18. Both were designed in response to combat experience, but the conclusions drawn were entirely opposite. The Germans looked at the T-34's sloped armour and powerful gun and decided they needed something similar but better, hence the Panther, with thicker sloped armour and a more powerful gun. It was an evolutionary response, taking existing concepts to their logical extreme. The Americans reached a revolutionary conclusion. The best armour is not being hit at all. The M18 represented a complete reimagining of what an armoured fighting vehicle could be. Not a mobile bunker, but a precision weapon on tracks, able to deliver strikes and evade retaliation. The M18's success at Arracourt offered profound lessons about military innovation. The Germans had pursued a linear path of development: more armour, bigger guns, heavier vehicles. Each generation of tank was an incremental improvement on the last, fighting the same way but with greater capability. The Americans, constrained by the need to ship vehicles across the Atlantic and faced with an enemy that had already optimized conventional tank design, chose revolution over evolution. The M18 didn't try to beat German tanks at their own game. It changed the game entirely. Throughout the battles around Arracourt and beyond, individual M18 crews performed acts of exceptional skill that demonstrated the vehicle's potential when manned by aggressive crews. Sergeant Henry R. Hartmann, who destroyed 6 Panthers on September 19th, became a legend within the tank destroyer force. His technique, using terrain to mask approach, striking from unexpected angles, and displacing immediately after firing, became the textbook example of M18 employment. On October 13th, when elements of the 11th Panzer Division reinforced with Tiger I tanks attempted to retake Arracourt, the battle demonstrated that even the Tigers' advantages couldn't overcome the M18's speed and tactics. Tigers lumbered forward at 15 miles per hour maximum speed, while M18s raced around their flanks. The Tigers' turret, even slower to traverse than the Panthers, couldn't track the fast-moving tank destroyers. The story of the M18's development and production was itself revolutionary. From concept to combat deployment took less than 2 years, unprecedented for a completely new armoured vehicle. The M18 originated in Harley Earl's design studio at Buick. Earl, famous for designing sleek automobiles, brought automotive sensibilities to military vehicle design. The production process utilised automotive mass production techniques. Workers who had built Buicks could, with minimal retraining, build Hellcats. Unlike German tanks, which required skilled craftsmen and specialised tools, M18s were built using standard automotive components wherever possible. The M18 incorporated numerous technological advantages that multiplied its effectiveness. The vehicle's fire control system, while simpler than German optical rangefinders, was faster to use in the fluid engagements that characterized M18 combat. The periscopic sight could be operated independently of the gun, allowing the commander to search for targets while the gunner engaged. German tanks required the entire turret to rotate for the commander to observe, making target acquisition slower and more obvious to enemies. The M18's ammunition storage was another advantage. Rounds were stored in protected bins that reduced the chance of catastrophic explosion if penetrated. M18 crews could survive hits that would destroy German vehicles, allowing experienced crews to remain in combat. As 1944 progressed into 1945, American tank destroyer doctrine evolved based on combat experience. While the initial concept of held reserves responding to massed tank attacks rarely materialized, M18s found themselves supporting infantry divisions, providing mobile anti-tank defense and direct fire support. This doctrinal flexibility proved another American advantage. While German Panzer units remained wedded to increasingly obsolete tactical concepts, American forces adapted continuously. M18 battalions developed new techniques for urban combat, forest fighting, and river crossings, situations their designers never envisioned. By early 1945, the German armoured force was caught in an impossible situation, partly created by the M18's success. Unable to match American mobility, German tanks were increasingly relegated to static defence. This surrendered all initiative to Allied forces and made German armour vulnerable to artillery and air attack. The production situation was equally dire. German factories, disrupted by bombing and starved of resources, struggled to maintain minimal production. Meanwhile, American factories continued producing M18s and other vehicles at rates that seemed impossible to German planners. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Forces, recognized the implications. The M18 was not just a tank destroyer, it was the physical manifestation of American industrial and tactical superiority. Germany could not win a mobile war against an enemy that moved at twice their speed, nor could they win a production war against an enemy that built vehicles in a fraction of the time. The Rhine crossing in March 1945 provided final validation of the M18's revolutionary impact. As German forces desperately tried to concentrate armour to prevent the crossing, M18s raced to critical points, often arriving hours ahead of German forces despite starting from farther away. At Remagen, when the Ludendorff Bridge was unexpectedly captured intact, M18s were among the first vehicles across, using their speed to establish a bridgehead perimeter before German forces could respond. Panthers and Tigers, rushing to contain the bridgehead, found M18s already in ambush positions. The M18's story didn't end in 1945. During the Korean War, 650 early production M18s were converted into M39s by removing the turret and fitting seats for up to 8 men in the open fighting space. The M39 armoured utility vehicles proved the chassis' enduring value. Perhaps more interesting were the reports from former Wehrmacht officers serving as advisors to the new West German Bundeswehr in the 1950s. When evaluating American armour for possible adoption, they universally recommended against heavy tanks and in favour of mobile systems inspired by the M18. The psychological impact of the M18 on German tank crews lasted long after the war. Veterans consistently rated the M18 as the most feared American armoured vehicle, ahead of the M26 Pershing heavy tank or tank-killing aircraft, like the P-47 Thunderbolt. The M18 had achieved something remarkable. It had not just defeated German armour tactically, but had broken the psychological superiority that German tank crews had enjoyed since 1940. The hunters had become the hunted, and they never recovered. The numbers tell the story of the M18's impact. Production timeline: design initiated, December 1941. First prototype tested, April 1943. Production began, July 1943. Peak production, January 1944, 250 units per month. Production ended, October 1944. Total produced, 2,507. Combat performance. Total enemy vehicles claimed destroyed, 526. M18s lost in combat, 216. Kill-to-loss ratio, 2.4 to 1. Mechanical readiness rate, 78%. Speed comparison, M18. Hellcat, 55 to 60 miles per hour road / 26 miles per hour cross-country. Panther, 29 miles per hour road, 15 miles per hour cross-country. Tiger, 24 miles per hour road, 12 miles per hour cross-country. Tiger 2, 21 miles per hour road, 10 miles per hour cross-country. The contrast between the Panther and M18 represented fundamentally different approaches to armoured warfare. The Germans had perfected the traditional tank, heavily armoured, powerfully armed, mechanically sophisticated. They had taken the concept as far as it could go, producing vehicles like the Tiger II that represented the ultimate evolution of World War I tank concepts. The Americans, with the M18, didn't build a better traditional tank. They built something entirely different, a vehicle that made traditional tanks less relevant. By prioritizing speed over armor, mobility over firepower, mechanical reliability over complexity, they created a weapons system that challenged decades of armored warfare doctrine. The influence of the M18's revolutionary design philosophy extends far beyond World War II. Modern armored warfare doctrine, emphasizing mobility, situational awareness, and networked operations over pure firepower and protection, can trace its roots directly to the lessons learned from the M18's success. The Israeli Merkava, the American M1 Abrams, the German Leopard 2, all modern main battle tanks incorporate lessons from the M18 experience. The importance of mechanical reliability, the value of superior situational awareness, the critical nature of tactical mobility. While these modern tanks are heavily armoured, they prioritize speed and agility to a degree that would have seemed impossible to World War II German tank designers. In post-war years, veterans from both sides reflected on the M18's impact. American tank destroyer crews spoke with pride about their vehicle's capabilities and the revolution it represented. German tank crews, even decades later, remembered the fear and frustration of facing an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. At a 1985 reunion at Arracourt, veterans from both sides walked the battlefield where the M18 had revolutionized armored warfare. German and American veterans, now elderly men, shared their experiences and acknowledged the transformation that had occurred there. The ceremony included a demonstration of a restored M18, which even 40 years later could still achieve its remarkable top speed. As it raced across the field where so many Panthers had met their end, the German veterans watched in silence, a testament to the enduring impact of the revolution they had witnessed. The story of German tankers encountering the M18 Hellcat represents more than tactical innovation or technological superiority. It represents a fundamental revolution in military thinking, a moment when an entire philosophy of warfare was rendered less effective by a radically different approach. The Germans had perfected the traditional tank, taking the concept as far as it could go with vehicles like the Tiger II. The Americans, with the M18, didn't build a better traditional tank. They built something entirely different, a vehicle that changed the nature of armoured combat. The German tankers who faced M18 at Arracourt and elsewhere were not just outfought. They were confronted with evidence that their approach to armoured warfare needed fundamental reconsideration. Their heavily armoured Panthers and Tigers, engineering marvels that they were, became vulnerable when faced with an enemy that refused to engage on traditional terms. With 526 enemy vehicles destroyed for 216 M18s lost, the numbers tell part of the story. But the real victory was psychological and doctrinal. The M18 proved that wars could be won not necessarily by the side with the biggest tanks or thickest armour, but by the side that could adapt, innovate, and implement new concepts fastest. In the end, the German tankers who survived encounters with the M18 carried with them a profound lesson. In warfare, as in evolution, it is not always the strongest that survives, but often the most adaptable. The M18 Hellcat, racing across the battlefields of France at speeds that seemed impossible, firing and vanishing like a ghost, represented that adaptability in its purest form. The revolution was complete. The age of pure heavy tank dominance was being challenged, and the importance of mobility, flexibility, and speed had been dramatically demonstrated. The German tankers who witnessed this transformation firsthand knew, even if they couldn't fully articulate it at the time, that they were watching not just a tactical defeat, but the birth of new concepts in armoured warfare. Their experience, preserved in military archives and historical studies, stands as evidence that sometimes in warfare, speed and agility can indeed defeat armour and firepower. especially when that speed reaches 55 to 60 miles per hour and comes with a 76mm gun. The M18 Hellcat had done more than destroy German tanks. It had destroyed German certainty about armoured warfare, shattered assumptions about tank combat, and demonstrated that revolutionary thinking could overcome evolutionary perfection. For the German tank crews who faced them in the fog at Arracourt and beyond, the Hellcats represented not just a new American weapon, but a new era in mechanized warfare, one where the race would indeed go to the swift